Imagine, right, working for a football club for 22 years.
Wow. Yeah, that's a whole career.
Exactly. I mean, you are part of the furniture. You know the players. You know the manager. You know uh, the exact way the dressing room needs to be set up on a freezing Tuesday night in December.
Right, you're the kit man.
You're the kit man. And then on Christmas Eve, you are fired.
Oh, man.
And not for stealing equipment or,
Mm.
being bad at your job. You are fired for a post you made on your personal social media account.
Which is wild.
Right. A post that the Football Association investigated and totally cleared. A post that your own club admitted contained no hate speech.
But they fire you anyway.
They fire you anyway because the club decides your personal political viewpoint brings them into quote-unquote disrepute.
Yeah, it's a heavy situation.
It really is.
Yeah.
And if you're listening to this and wondering how a beloved local sports team suddenly turned into like a geopolitical surveillance state monitoring its own employees, well, you have arrived at the exact intersection we are exploring today.
It's a really jarring reality to confront, you know?
Yeah.
Because you tune in on a Saturday to watch 22 people kick a ball around a piece of grass, basically looking for an escape from the heaviness of the world.
Right. Pure escapism.
Exactly. But the thesis we are unpacking today argues that the pitch is actually the epicenter of global geopolitics.
Yeah.
Like the escapism is the actual product being sold,
Yeah.
and the buyers are nation states and multinational corporations looking for cover.
Which brings us to the source material for this deep dive. We are looking into a massive, highly detailed report published in May 2026.
And it's a big one.
Very big. It's titled Red Card, English Premier League Sports Washing of Israel's Atrocities Against the Palestinians.
Right.
This was authored by Neil Salmons for the organization War on Want, with assistance from the International Center of Justice for Palestinians, or the ICJP.
Yeah,
And before we go a single step further, we really need to address the elephant in the room here.
we absolutely do.
If you've paid any attention to the news over the last few years, you know that the ongoing conflict between Israel and Palestine is, well, it's one of the most deeply emotive, highly polarized, and just tragic geopolitical crises of our time.
Yeah, without a doubt.
I mean, people lose their livelihoods over this debate. Families stop speaking to each other. It is a conversational minefield.
Which is exactly why we have to clearly define the rules of engagement for our discussion today.
Please do.
Because the source material we are looking at, it contains highly politically charged content. I mean, it makes severe allegations, uses very specific international legal frameworks, and takes a definitive stance.
A very firm stance.
Right. So we as your hosts want to be clear directly to you, the listener. We are absolutely not taking a side in this conflict.
No, not at all.
We are not endorsing the viewpoints of the authors. We are not validating their legal definitions, and we are not adopting their political stances.
Our job today is entirely forensic.
Exactly. We are just taking the architecture of this red card report, laying its blueprints out on the table, and examining how the authors construct their argument.
Right.
We're going to impartially dissect their claims, their data, and their ultimate demands, just so you can understand the mechanics of this specific debate without us telling you what to think about the underlying crisis.
Yeah, we are examining the engine of the argument, not steering the car.
I like that analogy.
So the mission today is to break this massive report down into 4 distinct pillars. First, we have to look at the mechanism of the alleged complicity, like how the authors argue corporate sponsors fundamentally alter the ethical standards of global sports.
Right, the mechanism.
Then second, we are going to look at the boardroom stakes. Specifically, the severe reputational and brand risks the report outlines for the clubs.
The financial side of it.
Exactly. Third, we'll get into the weeds of the micro-level blueprint. You know, the specific immediate changes demanded of the 20 individual English Premier League teams.
Yeah, what the clubs themselves need to do.
And finally, we will zoom all the way out to the macro level. The sweeping structural steps the authors recommend for the governing bodies, like the FA and FIFA.
It is an enormous amount of ground to cover.
It really is. So let's jump in. To start, we have to understand the foundational premise the authors are working from.
Right. So the core accusation here is that the business of modern football creates this sort of distortion field around global ethical standards.
A distortion field.
Yeah, and Salmons and the ICJP build their entire argument on 2 interconnected concepts, which are sports washing and normalization.
Right.
But you really can't understand the impact of those concepts until you look at the sheer just terrifying scale of the English Premier League as a commercial entity.
Oh, I totally agree. I always think of the EPL as like the closest thing we have to a truly global religion.
It basically is.
The numbers in the report are just staggering, and notes the league generates over £10 billion annually.
10 billion.
Yeah, it broadcasts to 200 countries.
Yeah.
It reaches up to 2 billion followers.
2 billion. That is, I mean, that's a quarter of the human population.
Right, a quarter of the planet emotionally invested in this one product.
And when you have that level of emotional capture, you essentially have the most valuable marketing real estate on the planet.
Oh, easily.
So the report argues that by placing corporate logos on these beloved cultural institutions, stretching them across the stadium, naming rights, embedding them on the players' chests, flashing them on those digital boards that ring the pitch.
Yeah, they're everywhere.
Right. The clubs are providing a massive reputational shield. And according to the text, this shield protects companies that the authors allege are directly complicit in severe human rights violations.
Which the report specifically defines as illegal occupation, apartheid, and genocide against the Palestinian people.
Exactly. That's the terminology they use.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
I'd argue we need to really break down the psychology of how that shield actually works.
Yeah, let's do it.
Because the report uses the term sports washing,
Right.
which, it gets thrown around a lot in the media, almost to the point where it loses its meaning.
It's become a bit of a buzzword.
Like a buzzword. But the authors are describing a very specific psychological mechanism here. Think about it. When your favorite striker scores a stoppage time winner to secure a championship, your brain is just flooded with dopamine.
Pure joy.
Pure, unadulterated joy. And right there, dead center on the chest of the player sliding on his knees toward the camera, is a corporate logo.
Yep.
So the argument is that you subconsciously map that positive affect, that emotional high, onto the brand. It's like renting out your halo to the highest bidder.
Halo renting, that analogy is incredibly precise because it really gets to the ROI, the return on investment for these corporations.
Right.
I mean, a company doesn't spend £40 million a year to put their name on a shirt just for brand awareness. They do it for brand association. The report argues this creates normalization. Seeing a logo every Saturday seamlessly integrated into your weekend routine, well, it makes that company seem fundamentally benign.
It just becomes part of the furniture.
Exactly. So the authors contend that if a company is, say, simultaneously providing the infrastructure for military targeting, the unifying power of football effectively scrubs that reality from the public consciousness.
Wow.
It justifies the unjustifiable by making it familiar.
Okay, but the report doesn't just make broad philosophical strokes about capitalism, right? It gets incredibly granular.
Very granular.
Salmons categorizes these corporate sponsorships into 4 distinct pillars of alleged complicity to build the case. So let's dig into the first one, which is tech and surveillance.
Right.
The report explicitly targets massive Silicon Valley giants. Google, specifically its parent company Alphabet, Cisco, and Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, or HPE.
And the level of operational detail the report uses to link these tech companies to the conflict is where the argument shifts from, abstract theory to concrete reality.
So give us an example. Look at Google.
Okay, so the authors spotlight Project Nimbus.
Project Nimbus.
Yeah. This is a $1.2 billion cloud computing contract awarded by Israel in 2021 to Alphabet and Amazon.
Wait, but a cloud contract sounds innocuous. It just sounds like server space.
Right. It sounds like digital storage. But the report claims this project provides the core technological infrastructure that houses data generated by the Israeli military and its population control systems.
Okay, and this is where we have to talk about how AI is actually used in modern warfare.
Yes, absolutely.
Because the report mentions specific artificial intelligence programs running on these digital infrastructures.
Right.
And I mean, they have these deeply dystopian names.
Oh, the names are chilling.
Like Lavender, Gospel. And where's Daddy?
The mechanics of these programs, as cited by the authors, are just terrifying. They point to claims that these AI systems facilitate automated military targeting and mass surveillance.
Automated targeting.
Yeah, rapidly generating targets for bombardment in what the authors describe as the Gaza genocide. So the argument is that the cloud infrastructure provided by these tech giants is the foundational bedrock that allows these AI models to process vast amounts of surveillance data in real time.
Because without the servers, the AI can't run.
Exactly. Without the server capability, the automated targeting doesn't function at scale.
So when a football club partners with a major tech firm for like a quote-unquote digital fan experience, the report is arguing they're partnering with the exact same server architecture running a war.
Yeah, it's the claim.
And the text also mentions Cisco providing specific networking hardware, right? And HPE holding the data registries for Israel's population, immigration, and borders authority.
Yes, and that HPE connection is particularly emphasized in the text.
Why is that one so important?
Because the report alleges that this specific population registry is the bureaucratic tool used to systematically violate the rights of Palestinians. Well, it governs movement, it dictates voting rights, and it essentially enforces structural inequalities. So the authors are drawing a direct, unbroken line from the servers managing that database to the corporate suites sponsoring the football matches.
Wow. Okay, so that covers the digital infrastructure.
Okay.
But the report then moves from the virtual world to the physical world, with its second category, which is demolitions and settlements.
Right.
This involves companies the authors link to the destruction of Palestinian homes and the sustaining of illegal settlements. And this is where we move away from complex AI and look at, everyday consumer brands like Coca-Cola and Expedia.
And the corporate structure of Coca-Cola makes this a really interesting case study in the report.
Because it's a franchise model, right?
Exactly. The authors don't point to the global headquarters in Atlanta directly. They focus on the Israeli licensee, which is the central bottling company.
Yeah.
The text notes this licensee operates a major logistics center in the Adaro Industrial Zone.
And where is that?
Well, that's located in occupied East Jerusalem. Furthermore, they highlight a subsidiary that produces wine from vineyards located in illegal settlements in the West Bank and the Syrian Golan.
Okay, and then there's the Expedia example, which I think really illustrates that concept of normalization we talked about earlier.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the report details how Expedia and its subsidiary Hotels.com list rental properties located in these exact same illegal settlements.
Yeah.
And I want to unpack the mechanism here. By allowing a user in London or New York to casually browse a vacation rental in a disputed territory, complete with, user reviews and a 5-star rating system, you are essentially turning international law violations into a frictionless e-commerce transaction.
It's just a holiday booking to them.
Exactly. And the report claims this makes the occupation more profitable and normalizes the displacement of people because it just looks like another Airbnb listing.
It completely sanitizes the geopolitical reality. You aren't seeing a military checkpoint. You are seeing a listing for a villa with a pool.
Right. It's wild. Okay, so what's the third category?
The third category the authors outline is finance and energy. Basically, the flow of capital in the fuel for the machinery.
Okay.
BP is cited as a major target here. The report states BP is the joint largest supplier of crude oil to Israel, providing 8% of Israeli crude between October 2023 and July 2024.
8%. That's significant.
Very. And the authors operate on the assumption that a significant portion of this fuel directly powers military operations. But really, the financial sector is where the report truly focuses its heaviest artillery.
Particularly regarding Barclays Bank.
Yes. Barclays is central to this.
And Barclays is massive in this context because they aren't just a sponsor of a single club. They were the main sponsor and the official banking partner of the entire English Premier League.
The whole league.
Yeah, which leads the authors into a brutal critique of what they view as the league's ethical hypocrisy. Because, the EPL runs these highly visible, very laudable campaigns. Every weekend, you see the no room for racism badges on the players' sleeves. The players take a knee before kickoff. But then Salmons pulls the financial data on Barclays.
And the data presented in the text is staggering, though it requires a bit of financial literacy to fully grasp.
Walk us through it.
Well, the report first draws a historical parallel. It details Barclays' history of backing the apartheid regime in South Africa decades ago.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, they suggest it's a pattern of institutional behavior, but then they bring it to the present. The authors cite that between January 2023 and August 2025, Barclays provided nearly $31 billion in loans and underwriting to 35 companies heavily involved in the region's conflict.
Wait, $31 billion?
Yes, $31 billion.
I think we really need to clarify what underwriting actually means in this context, because it's not just holding a checking account for a defense contractor, right?
No, not at all. Underwriting is active financial facilitation.
Yeah.
Look at it this way. When a massive defense contractor, like BAE Systems or Boeing or Lockheed Martin, when they need to raise billions of dollars to build manufacturing plants or develop new weapon systems, they don't just use cash on hand.
Right.
They issue bonds or new stock. An underwriter like Barclays steps in, evaluates the risk, and effectively guarantees that they will buy up those securities if the market doesn't.
So it's guaranteed money.
Exactly, thereby injecting massive guaranteed liquidity into the defense contractor. And the report also states Barclays held almost $44 billion in shares and bonds in complicit companies.
But $44 billion.
Yeah, so this is active, systemic financial support, not passive banking.
Okay, so the authors are looking at the No Room for Racism badge sitting right next to the Barclays logo on the broadcast, and they're pointing out the dissonance.
The hypocrisy as they see it.
They are essentially saying you cannot claim to champion human equality while taking millions from a bank that is underwriting the defense contractors, supplying what we define as an apartheid system. And just to complete the 4 categories, the report also lists material and ideological support, targeting companies like Meta, which owns Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, and Oracle, for their roles in content moderation and digital infrastructure.
Right. But the report goes further than just mapping out global supply chains.
It gets into the clubs themselves.
Yes. The authors argue that these massive financial entanglements directly degrade the internal, everyday culture of the football clubs themselves. The flow of money basically dictates the boundaries of acceptable speech within the stadium walls.
And this brings us right back to the story I opened with. The chilling effect on freedom of expression.
The Kit Man!
Yeah. The report details how clubs financially entangled with these entities systematically suppress any dissent or solidarity with Palestinians to protect the brand equity of their sponsors.
So the firing of the Arsenal kitman, Mark Bonnick, after 22 years of service, is presented as a prime example of this.
22 years. It's still wild to me.
Yeah. The text is very clear that Arsenal dismissed him for bringing the club into disrepute.
Which is such a vague term.
It is. The authors argue this is a classic corporate defense mechanism. The club prioritized the political sensitivities of their corporate sponsors and, the fear of online, politically motivated backlash over their own employees' fundamental right to peaceful expression.
Right.
So the report sees this not as an isolated HR issue, but as a systemic symptom of sports washing.
And the control extends from the payroll to the turnstiles, too.
Yes.
The report cites an incident where an Everton supporter was reportedly blocked by stadium stewards from entering Goodison Park until she covered up a Palestine top she was wearing.
Which is crazy.
The club essentially acted as a geopolitical bouncer.
But, okay, I have to inject some skepticism here.
Sure.
Because I understand the halo renting concept. But let's look at the actual function of a football club. Their primary objective, legally and commercially, is to win football matches, entertain millions of fans, and generate revenue for their shareholders.
Does the report realistically expect the board of directors at a club like, say, Aston Villa or Newcastle to act as a shadow United Nations?
Well,
Are they supposed to convene a geopolitical ethics committee every single time they need to sign a new hydration partner or a regional noodle sponsor in Asia?
what's fascinating here is that the authors anticipate that exact defense. The quote-unquote, we are just an entertainment business argument.
Right.
Their counter-argument is absolute. They say there is no such thing as neutrality when human rights are involved.
No neutrality at all.
None. Salmons and the ICJP believe that because football possesses such unparalleled cultural power, it forfeits the right to claim ignorance. Their thesis is that you cannot silo the entertainment product from the financial supply chain that funds it. By accepting the money, the clubs are making an active, conscious choice to legitimize the actions of those companies in the eyes of billions.
I see.
So to the authors, prioritizing a lucrative sponsorship deal over severe human rights violations isn't neutrality, it is complicity.
It's the idea that in a hyper-connected global economy, inaction is an action.
Exactly. Apathy is a policy.
Okay, so the report spends the first half building this really solid moral and ethical framework. But boardroom executives rarely make decisions based purely on moral philosophy.
Very rarely.
They make decisions based on risk and revenue. And this is where the report pivots brilliantly. It transitions into Section 2, the stakes.
Right.
It outlines the massive reputational, brand, and ultimately financial risks for the clubs.
And the language shifts here from ethical appeals to corporate self-preservation.
Okay.
The authors assert that clubs, many of which are heavily leveraged and desperate for financial liquidity to compete in the transfer market, while they are actively risking their hard-earned reputations for short-term cash injections.
Right, because buying players is so expensive.
Extremely. And they aren't just guessing about this risk. The report provides hard public opinion data from the UK to prove that boardroom decisions are fundamentally out of step with the people sitting in the stands.
Okay, wait, what does the polling data actually reveal? Because I'd assume the average fan walking into a stadium on a Saturday just wants a pint, a pie, and 3 points.
Right, that's the stereotype.
Do they actually care about the geopolitical footprint of the sponsors?
Surprisingly, yes. The data cited in the report suggests a massive disconnect between the executive suites and the general public.
Oh, really?
Yeah. According to their sources, large majorities of Britons strongly oppose Israel's actions in the conflict and actually support the arrests of indicted war criminals.
Wow.
The polling shows that more than twice as many Britons view Israel as a threat rather than an ally. Furthermore, strong majorities support a full arms embargo and support pension funds divesting from companies linked to the conflict.
Okay, so the authors are presenting this data to the club owners and saying, look at the demographics.
Who buys your ticket?
Exactly. The fan base you rely on to buy the kits, pay the exorbitant ticket prices, and subscribe to the streaming services, they fundamentally disagree with the actions of the corporate entities you are plastering all over your stadium.
You are actively antagonizing your own consumers.
Right. And the report points out that the risk isn't just limited to the corporate sponsors on the billboards.
Oh, it goes much higher.
The toxicity reaches all the way to the owner's box. This is the disreputable owners factor.
This is where the geopolitical web becomes incredibly tangled and highly sensitive.
Yeah.
Because the report explicitly names two massive clubs, Newcastle United, which is majority owned by the Saudi Arabian Public Investment Fund, or PIF,
Okay.
and Manchester City, whose chairman is Khaldoon Al Mubarak, who is a deeply influential senior figure in the UAE government.
Right. But why does the report single out these specific sovereign wealth connections in relation to this particular conflict?
Well, the authors draw a direct line between these state-linked ownerships and broader geopolitical maneuvers, specifically highlighting how both Saudi Arabia and the UAE have involved themselves with U.S. President Trump's Board of Peace.
Okay, let's unpack this Board of Peace,
Yeah.
because the name sounds positive on its face, right? But the report tears into it. What is the actual context here?
The context requires looking at how Palestinian civil society views these diplomatic initiatives.
Okay.
The report, echoing widespread Palestinian sentiment, heavily condemns this specific Board of Peace not as a legitimate conflict resolution tool, but as a colonial project.
A colonial project.
Yeah. They argue it is designed to provide diplomatic cover for war crimes, to legally entrench the military occupation, and to fundamentally deny Palestinians their right to self-determination.
That's a huge claim.
It is. So the authors argue that by having club owners and chairmen sitting on or engaging with this highly controversial political board, the football clubs are no longer just sports teams. They are active instruments of statecraft.
Wow. The report even challenges the foundational regulatory framework of English football over this, don't they?
They do.
They question whether these political ties should trigger a failure of the EPL's owners, directors, and senior executives regime, the ODSE.
And the ODSE is crucial to understand here.
Right.
Historically, English football had the fit and proper persons test, which was mostly designed to keep bankrupt businessmen and convicted fraudsters from buying historic community assets and just running them into the ground.
Right. It was about financial stability.
Yeah.
You have the cash.
Exactly. But the ODSE is the modernized version. So the authors of the Red Card Report are essentially demanding an evolution of this regime.
What kind of evolution?
They're asking, shouldn't active participation in a political project that the UN or human rights organizations view as facilitating illegal occupation disqualify you from owning a cultural institution like an English football club?
That is a fascinating question.
Should international humanitarian law be a metric for club ownership?
It's a radical expansion of what it means to be a fit and proper owner.
Yeah. Very radical.
And the report shows how brand toxicity is incredibly contagious, too.
Yes.
It's not just what your owner does, it's who your sponsor associates with. The Burnley example is fascinating.
No, you're right.
The report notes Burnley partnered with X, the platform formerly known as Twitter.
Yeah, and the authors point out that under the ownership of Elon Musk, the platform has been heavily criticized by digital rights
Oh,
organizations
what?
for transmitting alarming amounts of hate speech, incitement to violence, and the systemic dehumanization of Palestinians.
Wow.
So the report is asking the Burnley executives, what is the brand value of aligning your historic community football club with a digital platform that is actively degrading global public discourse?
And the concept of contagious toxicity is even more visceral in the example they give regarding PUA.
Yes, the PUMA situation.
Because PUMA is the kit sponsor for Manchester City, which is the dominant force in English football right now.
Right.
But PUMA also sponsors the Israeli club Maccabi Tel Aviv.
And the report dedicates significant space to documenting the behavior of Maccabi Tel Aviv fans to illustrate exactly how this brand toxicity functions.
Right, the incidents across Europe.
Yeah. They cite a pattern of severe incidents in Amsterdam, Germany, Greece, and Cyprus.
Wow.
The text explicitly details an incident where fans in Germany were filmed chanting for the death of Arabs and singing horrifying lyrics like, "There are no schools in Gaza because all the children are dead."
God. Doesn't get much darker than that.
It really doesn't.
And the report also references the massive disorder in Amsterdam, where fans were involved in violence based on perceived religion or ethnicity.
Yes. And here is the crux of the report's argument regarding corporate responsibility.
Okay.
They note that UEFA, the European governing body, actually fined Maccabi Tel Aviv for the racist incidents in Germany.
So they acknowledged it.
Exactly. The behavior was officially recognized and punished by the sports regulators. Yet, following these events, PUMA released a public statement saying they were proud to welcome Maccabi into their global family. No. Referring to them as a club representing excellence and loyalty.
So the authors take this sequence of events and place it directly on the boardroom table at Manchester City.
Basically.
They are saying, look at the exact nature of who your sponsor is partnering with. Look at the behavior they're willing to publicly endorse as excellence. When you wear the PUMA logo on your chest, that toxicity bleeds directly into your brand equity.
It stains the shirt, metaphorically.
Right. But here's where it gets really interesting, and I have to look at the harsh reality of the sports business model.
Go for it.
The report operates on the assumption that bad PR eventually equals financial damage. But if Manchester City continues to play breathtaking football, if Erling Haaland keeps scoring hat-tricks and they lift their 5th consecutive Premier League trophy in May, where is the evidence that reputational damage actually hurts the bottom line?
That's the big question.
Right. Don't the global TV numbers and the packed stadiums prove that fans are overwhelmingly willing to look the other way as long as the product on the pitch is elite?
You are identifying the absolute ultimate tension in modern sports capitalism.
Yeah.
Because the report doesn't offer, a quarterly earnings projection showing a 5% drop in merchandise sales tied to a specific geopolitical event.
Right. They can't prove that.
No. Their argument is structural and long-term. The global brand equity of the Premier League, the whole reason they can sell broadcast rights for billions of dollars to NBC in America or Sky in the UK, relies entirely on the league being a universally beloved, unifying, family-friendly product.
It relies on the illusion of clean escapism.
Precisely. The report suggests that by digging their heels in and aligning with entities that are currently under severe scrutiny by bodies like the UN and the International Court of Justice, these clubs are taking a massive generational gamble.
A generational gamble.
Yeah, they are risking the alienation of younger demographics. Gen Z and millennials, who polling shows are highly politically engaged and heavily value corporate social responsibility.
That makes sense.
The fear the authors are trying to instill is that over the next decade, these clubs could transition from unifying cultural symbols into toxic political lightning rods.
And once that happens,
Once a brand becomes a symbol of oppression for half the globe, it severely limits future commercial growth.
okay, so the authors have laid out the ethical failures, they've mapped the corporate supply chains, and highlighted the long-term financial risks.
Yeah.
The diagnosis is basically complete.
Right.
Now, the discussion has to shift to the prescription. What is the actual blueprint? What are the micro-level, immediate solutions the Red Card report demands from the 20 individual Premier League clubs operating right now?
Well, the authors are highly systematic in their demands. They created what they call the Premier League Table of Complicity.
Cable of complicity.
Yes. They literally ranked all 20 teams, not by points won on the pitch, but by their sponsors' ties to the conflict.
Wow.
And they utilized data from 5 authoritative human rights and corporate accountability databases to build this index.
I want to look at the top of that table, because according to the text, Liverpool ranks first, with 6 complicit sponsors. Arsenal is right behind them with 5. Tottenham Hotspur has 5. Manchester City and Manchester United both have 4.
The biggest clubs.
Exactly. The absolute titans of global football, the clubs with the most historical prestige and global reach, are sitting right at the top of this complicity index.
Yeah.
So what is the immediate directive for the executives at Liverpool or Arsenal? What do they have to do today?
The immediate demand is a complete overhaul of their internal auditing and compliance structures.
Okay.
The report insists these clubs carry out heightened forensic due diligence on all partners, parent companies, and institutional investors.
Forensic due diligence.
Yes, the era of just looking at whether a company can clear a check is over. They have to map the supply chain, investigate the subsidiaries, and understand the geopolitical footprint of the capital flowing into the club.
Okay, let's play out the scenario. A club does the audit. They map the supply chain of their official regional airline partner, and they find a red flag, a subsidiary operating in an illegal settlement.
Right.
The report doesn't just suggest they send a strongly worded email to the CEO, does it?
Not at all. It outlines a very strict escalation protocol.
Which is?
First, the report demands that the clubs utilize their massive cultural and financial leverage to pressure these business partners to fundamentally alter their operations.
Wait, so they want the chairman of a Premier League club to pick up the phone, call the executives at Barclays or Google, and demand policy changes.
Exactly. Using the threat of withdrawing the football club's brand association as leverage.
But what if the multinational corporation, which probably dwarfs the football club in total revenue, refuses to change their global strategy based on a phone call from a football team?
If the leverage fails, the report unequivocally demands the clubs sever ties.
Just cut them off.
They must rip up the contracts and drop these sponsors as quickly as legally possible.
That'd be chaos.
The authors anticipate the argument that this would be financial suicide for the clubs. But their counter is that transitioning to ethical partners is not only a moral imperative, but a necessary opportunity for long-term brand health.
Okay.
They argue clubs must be willing to bite the short-term financial bullet to maintain their long-term integrity.
Wow. And the blueprint doesn't just focus on external contracts either. It demands major reconstructive surgery on the internal culture of the clubs.
Oh, yes.
We talked about the chilling effect on speech with Mark Bonnick at Arsenal, but the report pulls in other examples across European football to show how deep this rot goes.
Yes, the report demands an absolute protection of freedom of expression within the clubs.
Absolute protection.
They insist that staff, players, and supporters must never face sanctions for showing peaceful solidarity with victims of what the authors define as genocide and apartheid.
So who else do they mention?
They cite the highly publicized case of Anwar El Ghazi. He was a Dutch international player who previously played in the Premier League for Aston Villa. He moved to the Bundesliga in Germany to play for Mainz.
And what happened?
Well, after expressing solidarity with Palestinians on social media, Mainz abruptly terminated his contract.
And the legal system actually pushed back on that.
I read.
The text notes El Ghazi took the club to court over the dismissal, challenged the legality of firing someone for political speech, and actually won significant compensation.
He won.
Right.
And the report uses that legal victory to show that the clubs are overstepping their bounds.
Yeah.
They also highlight a case closer to home, looking outside the top flight to fifth-tier English club Dagenham and Redbridge.
Okay, what happened there?
They hired a new director of development and engagement, Dr. Salma Mashauer.
Okay.
She was dismissed after exactly 3 days on the job.
3 days? How does that even happen?
The report details that her dismissal was triggered by an organized complaint campaign led by a pro-Israel group. They dug up old social media posts where she defended the right to resist occupation.
Okay.
The critical detail here is that the football club publicly admitted her posts did not promote hate or terror, yet they capitulated to the external pressure and stood by the dismissal anyway.
Wow.
The authors present this as a systemic, cowardly failure of football institutions to protect their employees from targeted, politically motivated smear campaigns.
It's just wild how fast these clubs fold. And the authors also tie this suppression of speech into a much broader, highly uncomfortable critique of how the football industry handles racism overall, don't they?
They do. It's a major point.
The report urges clubs to acknowledge massive structural blind spots in their equality initiatives. They argue that while football is quick to launch high-profile campaigns against certain types of racism, it maintains a deafening silence when it comes to anti-Arab, anti-Muslim, and anti-Palestinian prejudice.
And the demographic data they use to illustrate this structural inequality is jarring.
What's the data?
The report cites that while 43% of Premier League players on the pitch are Black, only 3.2% of senior staff in the boardrooms and executive suites are.
43% versus 3.2%.
Yes. And the authors use this disparity to argue that the power structures of the sport remain fundamentally exclusionary.
Absolutely.
They also point to a specific recurring issue regarding Muslim players. In recent years, matches have briefly paused during Ramadan to allow Muslim players to break their fasts.
Yeah, I remember seeing that.
The report claims there have been incidents of supporters booing these breaks, and that this specific type of abuse is largely ignored by the mainstream sports media and the league's disciplinary bodies.
So they're essentially demanding comprehensive human rights policies that protect everyone equally, rather than the current system, which they view as selective, PR-driven anti-racism campaigns that only activate when it's commercially safe.
Exactly. Commercially safe anti-racism.
So what does this all mean for the business of sports? I mean, I have to step back and look at the sheer scale of what is being asked of a mid-sized business, which is what most football clubs actually are.
Right.
The report is asking a club like Crystal Palace or Fulham to essentially hire the equivalent of their own State Department.
It's a huge ask.
They are supposed to audit the entire global supply chain of every institutional investor. And the report specifically mentions firms like BlackRock and Vanguard, who hold major shares in complicit companies like American Express and HPE.
Yes, the massive index funds.
The BlackRock and Vanguard basically own a piece of the entire global economy through those index funds. I'd argue the report is demanding an impossible standard of corporate purity.
An impossible standard.
Right. Is there a single pound, dollar, or euro left in the global financial system that isn't at least 3 degrees of separation away from some geopolitical conflict?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you've hit on the exact counter-argument the authors knew they would face, the impossible standard defense. Because the authors draw a highly intentional, direct parallel to the sporting and economic boycotts of apartheid South Africa in the 1970s and 1980s.
Wow. That is the heaviest historical comparison you can make in this context.
It is. It is the anchor of their entire thesis. The report's stance is that claiming a standard is impossible to meet or too economically complex is the exact excuse historically used by massive corporations to avoid accountability.
To maintain the profitable, unethical status quo.
Precisely. The authors point out that in the 1980s, financial institutions argued that untangling global finance from South Africa was too complex, that it would ruin the markets, that index funds couldn't be parsed.
Right.
But the boycotts gained momentum, the pressure became insurmountable, and the untangling happened. The apartheid regime fell, in part due to that economic isolation.
So they view the friction, the financial difficulty of severing these ties, not as a bug in the system, but as the necessary works of moral progress.
Exactly. They believe that if a cultural behemoth like the English Premier League leads by establishing hard ethical boundaries, the free market will eventually be forced to adapt and provide clean, ethical financial alternatives.
They are asking football to be the vanguard of a new economic standard.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, so that covers the micro level, the immense burden placed on the 20 clubs.
Right.
But let's be realistic. What if the clubs simply refuse?
Which is likely.
Right. What if they look at the spreadsheet, look at the legal penalties for breaking a mega contract with a tech giant, and decide they cannot or will not act alone?
Then what?
This brings us to the fourth and final section of the report's blueprint, the overseers. We are talking about the macro governors of the sport, the Premier League Executive Board, the English Football Association, and the ultimate global authority, FIFA.
Right, the governing bodies.
So what are the demands here?
Well, the report ultimately places the heaviest burden of responsibility on these macro governors. If the clubs won't act, the regulators must force them. The authors detail sweeping, systemic changes to the very fabric of how the sport is governed. The most immediate demand is for the EPL and the FA to bypass individual club discretion entirely.
And do what?
Implement an outright league-wide ban on any sponsorship by companies complicit in war crimes and the serious human rights violation.
The total ban.
Yes.
But to enforce a ban like that, you need a regulatory framework. You can't just define complicity on a whim.
Right. So the report demands the leagues adopt clear ethical sponsorship standards, and they specifically point to the UN guiding principles on business and human rights.
The UNGPs.
Yes. The UN guiding principles are basically the international gold standard for corporate accountability established in 2011.
What are they based on?
They are built on 3 pillars: the state's duty to protect human rights, the corporate responsibility to respect human rights, and the need for greater access to remedy for victims. The report argues that the FA and the EPL must formally integrate these UN principles into their foundational rulebooks. This would mean human rights due diligence isn't just a PR exercise. It becomes a binding regulatory requirement to participate in the league.
Wow. But the authors don't stop at the football regulators, do they? They zoom out even further and point the finger directly at Downing Street.
Yes, the UK government.
The report holds the UK government partially responsible for creating what it terms a permissive environment that allows these sponsorships to flourish.
And the demands placed on the UK government are significant.
Like what?
The authors want the government to step in and aggressively advise the private sector, the banks, the tech firms, the consumer brands, that they risk losing access to UK markets, government contracts, and financial services if they are found to be involved in these atrocities.
No, it's huge.
Furthermore, they demand the government explicitly remind corporate executives that they carry individual criminal responsibility under international law for facilitating war crimes.
That is a massive escalation. You are asking the government to essentially threaten corporate executives with The Hague over a football sponsorship.
It is a massive escalation.
And yet, the international demands regarding football governance aim even higher. The report targets FIFA, the global governing body located in Switzerland.
Yes, FIFA is a major target.
The authors are calling for the English Premier League and the English FA to weaponize their immense global influence and demand that FIFA officially sanction Israel and the Israel Football Association, the IFA.
Right. And the legal grounding the report uses for this specific demand is rooted in the territorial integrity of football associations.
Territorial integrity, what does that mean?
Well, the text notes that the IFA currently includes several football teams that are physically based in illegal settlements within the occupied territories.
Ah, okay.
The authors argue that by allowing these specific settlement teams to compete under its official umbrella, the IFA is actively normalizing the illegal annexation of land. And by extension, because FIFA recognizes the IFA, FIFA is flouting international law.
The report is incredibly critical of FIFA's current leadership, isn't it? Deserving a lot of anger, specifically for FIFA President Gianni Infantino.
The critique of Infantino is scathing.
Yeah.
The report notes that despite repeated calls from human rights organizations, FIFA has flatly refused to meaningfully sanction the IFF for what the authors describe as systemic discrimination and deep-rooted racism against Palestinians.
And they compare it to another situation, right?
Yes, they draw a sharp contrast to illustrate this point. They look at how FIFA handled the persistent, highly documented racist and anti-Arab behavior of the fans of the Israeli club Beitar Jerusalem.
Okay.
The report states FIFA essentially gave the IFA a minor slap on the wrist, a small fine, and a demand to display an anti-racism banner.
A banner.
A banner. The authors view this as a complete systemic failure of international sporting law to protect the marginalized.
The authors tie Infantino directly back to the geopolitical web we discussed earlier regarding the owners of Manchester City and Newcastle.
Yes. The report highlights the deep irony of Infantino awarding U.S. President Trump the inaugural FIFA Peace Prize.
A peace prize.
Yeah. They also note Infantino's active participation in Trump's highly controversial Board of Peace, which we discussed earlier.
Right.
The authors use these connections to paint a really grim picture. They argue the global football governance structure isn't just failing to stop human rights abuses, it is actively structurally aligned with the political architectures that enable the very atrocities the report condemns.
Okay, I have to push back hard on the sheer scale and feasibility of these macro demands.
Sure.
Because look at the chain of command the report is proposing. They are asking the English Football Association to force FIFA's hand globally, while simultaneously demanding the UK government step in to regulate domestic football sponsorships based on international law.
It's a lot.
Right. If the UK government itself hasn't sanctioned these specific companies, if the UK continues its own geopolitical alliances and arms sales in the region, Isn't the report barking up the wrong tree? Why demand a sports league essentially draft and enforce international foreign policy when the actual governments of the world are refusing to do so?
This raises an important question, and you've crystallized the core debate regarding the role of cultural institutions in modern society.
Because it just seems backwards.
The authors of the report would push back on your premise, though. They would argue that they aren't asking football to draft international law. They're simply asking football to abide by the laws that already exist,
Okay.
specifically pointing to recent rulings and investigations by bodies like the International Court of Justice.
But if the governments are dragging their feet, why is it on a football club to lead the charge?
Because, according to the authors, sports have historically been the tip of the spear for social change when traditional governmental diplomacy has failed, stalled, or been compromised by economic interests.
Give me an example.
They point again to the sporting boycotts of apartheid South Africa, which isolated the regime culturally way before the politicians caught up. They point to athletes like Tommy Smith and John Carlos raising their fists on the podium at the 1968 Olympics, forcing a conversation about civil rights that the government was trying to suppress.
Wow. Okay.
So the report's thesis is that football doesn't have the luxury of waiting for the slow, compromised machinery of government action. Because football possesses immense cultural, emotional, and financial power, it possesses a standalone, independent moral duty to act.
A moral duty to act.
Yes. The authors firmly believe that if a cultural giant like English football shows the red card to these corporations, it forces broader society and eventually governments to follow suit.
It is a fascinating, truly radical perspective on the real power of sports. It argues that a football pitch is actually the most influential courtroom in the world.
That's exactly it.
Well, let's do a quick wrap-up of the immense amount of ground we've covered today.
We covered a lot.
We've taken a deep dive into the Red Card Report authored by Neil Salmons for War on Want and the ICJP. And the authors paint a very stark, highly detailed picture of the English Premier League.
Very stark.
They describe a globally beloved institution that is deeply systemically entangled in complex, highly controversial geopolitical conflicts. Through its corporate sponsors, its tech partners, its banking relationships with entities like Barclays, and its billionaire state-linked owners, the report alleges the league is actively providing a reputational shield for companies involved in severe human rights violations.
And in response to this diagnosis, the authors are demanding a total, uncompromising overhaul of the industry.
Right.
They want rigorous due diligence aligned with UN standards. They demand a genuine commitment to global human rights that extends beyond PR campaigns.
Meaningful action.
Yes. They want the absolute protection of free expression for staff and fans. And ultimately, they demand an end to what they view as the sportswashing of atrocities. They want individual clubs to aggressively sever ties with complicit sponsors, and they want the governing bodies, the FA and FIFA, to act as fierce, independent regulators enforcing these ethical standards globally.
And before we sign off, I want to reiterate our ground rules one final time, because the nature of this topic really demands it.
Absolutely. As we stated clearly at the beginning of the deep dive, this was purely an exploration of the claims, data, historical parallels, and recommendations presented in the Red Card Report. We have unpacked their specific arguments, their mechanisms of sports washing, and their legal frameworks to help you understand their perspective. We, as your hosts, are not taking any political stance on the underlying conflict.
No.
Nor are we validating or endorsing the specific allegations made against the corporations, individuals, or countries mentioned in the text.
We are just reading the map the authors provided and examining how they drew the borders.
Exactly.
But I do want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day. Something that builds on everything we've discussed about the intersection of money, morality, and sports. Imagine if this report's demands were actually met tomorrow morning. Imagine if global football leagues were suddenly forced by regulators to implement a flawless zero-tolerance policy on all geopolitical human rights violations.
Just overnight.
Overnight. They have to vet every single tech sponsor, every institutional investor, every bank, every sovereign wealth fund, and every billionaire owner against strict international humanitarian law. If that happened, would the multi-billion-dollar infrastructure of modern elite sports, which is so deeply intrinsically intertwined with global capital, would it simply collapse overnight under the weight of that scrutiny?
Would the leagues go bankrupt?
Right. Or By surviving that friction, would it finally force the creation of a completely new, genuinely ethical economic model for global entertainment? Thanks for taking the deep dive with us.